fundamental principles, it is very easy to go ahead with the matter. Originally in 1861, the contract, New York Contract Code was framed, and our Contract Act 1872 was enacted. And from section 239 to 266 of the Contract Act contained the provisions relating to the Partnership Act. In or around 1932, a select committee was appointed, and the select committee deleted this 239 to 266, brought out a new legislation of Partnership Act, which is largely based on the English Act itself. All of us would have seen in our, whichever college or wherever you might have studied, the contract is always divided into two papers. One is called as a general contract, the other is called as a special contract. Section 1 to 75 of the Contract Act deals with the general principles of contract, which is applicable to all contracts, whether it is sale of goods, partnership, negotiable instruments. The special contracts, namely the Sale of Goods Act, Partnership Act, add certain special features, and so far as there is no inconsistency, section 1 to 75 will operate. I want you to remember this as a fundamental principle. Now, the Contract Act is divided, the Partnership Act is divided into 8 chapters. The chapter 1 from section 1 to 3 deals with the definition, preamble, applicability. 4 to 8 deals with the definition of partnership, firm, etc. And then chapter 2, that is in chapter 2. Chapter 3 deals with the rights, obligations, duties of partners vis-a-vis the inter se partners with third parties, etc. And chapter 4 deals with 39 to 55 deals with dissolution, then it is registration and supplemental provision. Now, what exactly is this partnership? As I told you, the partnership is essentially an agreement. It is defined in section 4 of the Partnership Act. May I just invite your attention? It is hardly 3-line definition. I'll ask my friend to host it. You can just rush through the definition. It will be on the screen in 2 seconds. It is an agreement between 2 or more persons. It is an agreement between 2 or more persons who have agreed to share the profits of a business carried on by all or any of them acting for all. Now you will find, therefore, there is essentially the 3 elements are, it is an agreement. And in order to constitute the agreement, you require more than 2 persons. And 3, this idea of this doing a partnership is to share the profits. And how do you get the profits? By running a business. And who runs the business? The business is run by all of them or anyone acting for all. This is all the issue is. But normally this partnership, whether a particular relationship constitutes a partnership or not, is dependent upon the facts presented. Normally, it is very easy. Normally what we do is, whenever we ask a question, we will be knowing the answer because we have studied the law during our college days and thereafter also. But answering a question and scoring marks is different from understanding the facts and presenting the facts to bring it within the framework of a particular definition. This would be the actual problem. Now let us take, for instance, there is no understanding. The understanding is not reduced to writing. There is no agreement which is reduced to writing between 2 persons who carry on business as a partner. The question will be, how do you prove the partnership? And what are the essential features that you will do? The first is, as I said, it is an agreement entered into between 2 persons. And you will remember, an agreement defined in Contract Act Section 2H is, it consists of an offer and an acceptance. And ultimately, when it is enforceable in law, it becomes a contract. Therefore, this fundamental principle must be available in the partnership also. When you go to the partnership, therefore, you will have to go through from section 11 from the Contract Act up to 23 to find out whether all the necessary ingredients of a contract are present. In other words, the capacity to enter into a contract, the fact that there is consideration, that the consent is not brought out by misrepresentation, fraud, or undue influence, these aspects must also be taken note of. When we say the capacity to enter into a contract, you will straight away come to the conclusion that a minor cannot become a partner of a firm. Therefore, fundamentally, you have to understand one person and another minor cannot become a partner. But Partnership Act also provides for a particular position. It says a minor, though cannot become a partner, can always be admitted to the benefits of the partnership. That is provided by Section 30 of the Act. I will come to it little later. Now, therefore, the first principle is that there is an agreement. What is this agreement? Agreement is to do a business. And how do we understand the word business? Business is nowhere defined in this. Therefore, you will have to go into the natural grammatical meaning. Any trading, any corporation, any activity that is done will come up within the concept of business. And what is the object of running a business? The object of running a business is to make profits. And if the profits are there in the firm, then it has to be shared between the partners. When it's shared between the partners, that would constitute a partnership. But that is not all the tests. There can be a case where somebody may say, I don't even require the profit for myself. That such a situation can arise. But what do we mean by the word profits that is occurring in Section 4? Please understand, it is only net profits and not gross profits. What do we understand by gross profit? The difference between the cost of production or the cost incurred for the purpose of purchasing the material and selling it and the sale price normally denotes the gross profit. But net profit is arrived only after taking into account other expenses for running the business and net profits. Sharing of gross profit will not constitute a partnership. It will be something outside the realm of partnership. It is only net profits that is necessary to find out whether a person is a partner or not. But what exactly is the test? Is sharing of profits alone sufficient to constitute this test? The answer is, it is not so. The important test is laid down in Section 6. Now, please have a look at Section 6. If you will find, in determining whether a group of persons is or is not a firm, or whether a person is not a partner of a firm, regard shall be held to the real relation between the parties as shown by all relevant facts taken together. Therefore, first paragraph Section 6 makes it abundantly clear that it is the factual presentation that matters. It does not lay down a law. It merely says, in order to find out, you must have regard. When I say that you must have regard, it is not the sole and exclusive test, but it must be the most important factor which will have an impact on taking a decision will be the real relation between the parties. Therefore, it is a question of fact is paragraph 1. Then you will find explanation 1 and 2. Sharing of profits or of gross returns arising from the property by persons holding a joint or common interest in that property does not of itself make such person as partners. You know, explanation is a legislative device where you clarify a particular position. It normally does not carve out an exception, but it clarifies a position which is found in the main provision. So the paragraph 1, explanation clarifies it. Therefore, if there is a property, let us assume A and B are owners of a property. A rent is received from the property. That rent is shared between these two persons. When these two persons share the profit, the rent, would it amount to a partnership? The regard shall be had to a natural relationship. This is not a case of running a business. There is a property, a rental income comes there, they take it, they are joint owners or the co-owners of the property and they are sharing the rent. It does not constitute a partnership. But slightly extend this particular example, which is applicable to the present day cases where there is a big building, two brothers own the property, they construct several rooms in that particular place, provide a kitchen, and then let it out as a service apartment. Now, as far as once it is let out as a service apartment, there is a business activity. In the business activity, there will be a gross profit, there will be a net profit. Now, in this case, when there is a sharing of profit is concerned, then automatically it becomes a partnership subject to other conditions. Therefore, explanation 1, it says mere sharing of profits does not conclusively prove that there is a partnership. Explanation 2 Receipt by a person of a share of the profits of a business or of a payment contingent upon earning profits, varying profits earned by the business, does not himself make a partner with persons carrying on the business. There can always be a case. I may carry on business, somebody else procures business for me and I run the business along with my other partners. That third person is given as percentage of my profit every time because he procures business for me. The relationship between this firm and that person is something which says you are entitled to a percentage by way of remuneration. And even though it is calculated on the basis of a profit, that ipso facto does not lead him to become a partner. And in particular, the receipt of such other payment by a lender of money to persons engaged or about to engage in business. Loan transactions are not covered. By servant or agent as remuneration, not covered. The widow or child of a deceased partner as annuity, I'll come a little later than that. By a previous owner or part owner of the business as consideration for the sale of the goodwill or share thereof, does not itself make the receiver a partner. Therefore, section 6 consists of a factual situation. It clarifies in explanation 1 and 2 and says very clearly that these things, the 4 cases, will not come within the concept of partnership. Now we will go back a little to the other position. When a partner, therefore, individually is called as a partner and collectively it is called as a partnership, and the name of the under which they carry on is a firm and firm's name. This is all the background. Now, in order to prove that, therefore, there has to be a document. But is a writing down of a partnership deed compulsory? It is not compulsory. It is not necessary that the partnership deed should be in express terms. But we must also remember that this statement is not absolute in its nature, for the simple reason, if I am going to register it with the registrar of firms, which we will deal with that, then there has to be a document evidencing the partnership, therefore deed is required. But partnership can also be assumed and inferred from the conduct of the parties. Let me give you an example. In the books of accounts, if somebody says there is a capital account of the other partner, the return taken by him, the expenses incurred by him, etc., then it also evidences the existence of a partnership. Consequently, though it is not necessary to have a partnership deed as such, but it is always better to have a partnership deed because that alone would stand. Proving the facts otherwise may become difficult. The partnership and firm are to be understood differently. Collectively, the partners are known as partnership. But when collectively known as firm, the name of the firm is firm's name, and partners are known as the individual partners. The agreement between the partners is known as a partnership. The reason is, normally, if the deed provides that the retirement of a partner shall not result in the dissolution of the firm, the partnership will continue. And if you look into what is meant by dissolution of a firm, a dissolution of a partnership results in dissolution of a firm. A retirement of a partner, if it specifically provides, it does not ipso facto lead to a dissolution. If the document provides, it does not lead to. If the document does not provide, it leads to a dissolution of a firm. So therefore, under section 6, what is the essence? The essence of a partnership is where the principle of agency comes. This is where the last limb of section 4 comes into operation. Business carried on by all of them or anyone acting for all of them. Therefore, the test for finding out whether a relationship of partnership exists is to find out whether each and every partner is entitled to represent the other partner in the business carried on by the partnership. If this principle is absent, then obviously it is not a partnership. This is where we go back to the illustration. When A, B, C are partners, they have a contract with the D who procures the customers, and in the net profit, a particular remuneration is given to him, even though there is an agreement where he shares a profit in a particular manner, calculated, etc. It is only in the net profit. Even then, it will not become a partner for the simple reason that the principle of agency will be missing. The principle of agency, which is the quintessence of a partnership, is that he must be able to bind the other partners by the act of the firm. The test, therefore, would be to find out whether the principle of agency is there or not. Once you complete the section 6, all that we have to understand is, then how do we go about it? We prepare a partnership deed. In the partnership deed, you must understand there is no provision of contracting out of the statute. It does not prohibit. Therefore, most of the provisions of the Partnership Act are subject to the contract to the contrary. In other words, if the partnership deed is silent or there is no written partnership deed, if there is no agreement to do a particular thing, then whatever the Act says alone will be applicable. In other words, the provisions of the Partnership Act can be varied by partners by incorporating a particular provision in the partnership deed. But you cannot take away the fundamental principle, namely that there is an agreement to carry on business, that the principle of agency cannot be removed. Now, once you write this, what happens? Where do you exactly register? You don't go in and register with the registrar of firms. Unlike other documents, wherever there is a particular an agreement between parties which results in the transfer of a property, etc., you go to the registrar office and register it. There is no such registration contemplated. Stamp duty is contemplated under the Stamp Act, but registration that is talked about in the Partnership Act is covered from section 68 onwards, 67 onwards. This registration is with the registrar of firms. The question then arises, is registration of a partnership compulsory? Is it optional or is it obligatory? The answer is, it is optional, not obligatory, which means an unregistered firm also carry on business. Then what exactly is the problem? The problem comes in section 69. I just posted section 69, have a glance and I will come back to you on that. So section 69(1) talks about the effect of non-registration. No suit to enforce a right arising from a contract or conferred with this act shall be instituted in any court by or on behalf of any person suing a partner in the firm against the firm or any person alleged to be or have been a partner of the firm unless the firm is registered. If you look into this, if you look into section 69(1) and 2, paragraph 1 merely says a general prohibition from filing a suit between the partners. In other words, one partner cannot file a suit against him unless otherwise the firm is registered. When does one partner write a suit against another partner? In order to dissolve the firm, to ask for rendition of accounts, any intermediary relief that is sought, all these things would come. But that is prevented if you go further down to section 69(3). These things are exempted. Even for an unregistered firm, one partner can proceed against him for dissolution or for rendition of accounts, but not otherwise. The problem then arises is only in 69(2). Under section 69(2), an unregistered firm cannot file a suit or enforce a particular right unless otherwise the firm is registered. But how does that right arise? There is a catch. The right that a partner wants to or a firm wants to exercise in the civil court is not the right that arises under any other law, but only under a contract. Please note the word only under the contract. Therefore, if a firm A supplies goods to another firm B, and for recovery of money, firm A wants to file a suit, then it must have a registration, because supply of goods arises on a contract, money due for that arises on a contract, Contract Act applies, Sale of Goods Act applies. Consequently, if there is no registration, the suit cannot be maintained. But does it mean that the registration has to be there on the day when you entered into the contract? It is not so. Just before filing the suit, the firm can be registered, even if the transaction was entered into when the firm was not registered, yet it is maintainable. You can file a suit provided there is a registration certificate. As the very word indicates, it is only on the contract. Liability which you try to enforce or the principles which you want to initiate, otherwise than on a contract, can be still sustained. 69(2) is not a bar. Let us have a very solid example. Let us assume there is a partnership firm which produces movies. Since they are the producer or author of a story and producer of a movie, he has got a copyright over that particular movie. When he has a copyright, somebody infringes it. This firm is not registered. they file a suit for injunction, declaration, damages, etc., etc., against the person who infringes the copyright. Now, since this firm is not registered, can the person who is infringing, can the defendant come forward with a plea that this is not a registered firm, therefore your suit is not maintainable? Please understand, under 69(2), this matter does not arise in a contract. The relationship between the firm and the person who infringes does not arise on a contract. Prior to the Copyright Act or probably Patent Act or Trademarks Act, this was covered by the law of torts. The law of torts, if it is not a registered trademark, the passing off is an act which arises under the law of torts. It's a tortious claim and a tortious liability. Now, consequently, under the Copyright Act, the non-registration would not affect. If you want to have a judgment, please make a note. I'm giving you only 2 or 3 judgments for your understanding because these are all practical importance. 2003 SEC, 2003 SEC 250, Haldiram Fujiwala versus Anand Kumar Deepak Kumar. 2003 SEC 250, Haldiram Fujiwala, Anand Kumar Deepak Kumar. There it is not required. So similarly, in Indian Oil Corporation versus Devi Construction Engineering Contractors, 2009, 2 Law Weekly, 489, in order to invoke an arbitration, 849, 2 Law Weekly, 849, it was held that 69 is not a bar for the purpose of invoking the arbitration clause. It need not be registered. That was the judgment. That is, this the second one is a judgment of the Madras High Court. And if you want the under the Negotiable Instruments Act also, it is not applicable. Please take this judgment. Hindustan Afzal Bakers versus Maya Printers and others, 2016, SEC Online, Kerala, 29914. Under the Negotiable Instrument Act, the similar question arose when a this was a suit that was filed on recovery of money under chapter what we call as an Order 37 suit, which is Hindustan International Construction Corporation Limited versus RS Wood International and others. Hindustan International Construction Corporation Limited versus RS Woods International and others, 2019, SEC Online, Delhi 12960. Therefore, you will find more exceptions for 69(2) because 69(2) is not, does not prohibit other action other than arising under a contract. Now, most important thing is when you file a register of firms, when you file it with the registrar of firms, you normally go there, register it. Every April, you have to file your return, and whatever return that is filed under Section 68 of the Partnership Act, it constitutes a conclusive proof, and there is a principle of estoppel. If a statement is made before the registrar of firms that X is a partner, Y is a partner, that would be binding. Now, with regard to the whether who can be partners, even though another partnership firm, a trust, etc., are not juristic persons, courts have repeatedly held HUF can be a partner, a trust can be a partner, but they are all normally recognized under the Income Tax Act for the purpose of assessment, and that has gained recognition. Only thing is, HUF will be represented by a Karta. All the members of the HUF will not become partner. Only Karta will say, I am representing this HUF, this is the partner. So also in the case of a trust. Now we will have to understand this is the broad outline of what the partnership is about. Then we go into the most important thing, Section 14. I'm trying to reduce I'm ready for other things. I'm trying to reduce it. Let us go to straight away Section 14. What is meant by the property of the firm? The reason why I'm making this statement, there is always a difficulty in finding out what is the property of the firm. The property of the firm is either produced, evidenced by a document, or in the alternative, it is shown in the books of accounts. If a property comes into the firm at the commencement of the business, or thereafter it is acquired in the money of the partnership firm, it is always, it takes the nature of a property of the firm. What is the interest of a person, a partner in the firm? The interest of a partner in the firm is to have a share in the profits and property of the firm. Please note the word share in the profits and the property of the firm. Once even an immovable property comes into the coffers of the partnership firm, it partakes the nature of a movable property. And when a firm is dissolved at the time of winding up, under section 48 of the Partnership Act, this, while taking the way, they will first take the third party's debt will be paid, then their capital will be returned, then residue will be returned. There is a rated distribution between the partners. When it comes, they also get these properties which are there, and each partner gets an interest, undivided interest in the property that comes into the business. Two interesting questions arise in this aspect. A, when a person has got an immovable property, they want to carry on a business, they want to construct an office. This person says, I am bringing the land as my, sorry, where he wants to bring about a business and he says, I am giving my land towards my share of the capital. A partnership deed specifically says, A is the owner of the land bearing such and such a place is introduced as his capital in the partnership firm, it becomes a firm's property. The question that arose was whether this partnership deed, which in fact takes the property of another person, brings it to the account of the partnership firm, does it require registration? Does it require a stamp duty? This question came up before the Madras High Court in AAR 1970 Supreme Court. In AAR 1970, AAR 70 Madras, page 5. AAR 1970 Madras, page 5. Chief Controlling Revenue Authority versus Chidambaram. Chief Controlling Revenue Authority versus Chidambaram, where they held no stamp duty is payable because there is no actual transfer. It is put into the hotspots of a partnership firm. It becomes the property of all the partners thereafter. No registration is required. The matter which leads is AAR 1966 Supreme Court 1300 Narayanappa versus Bhaskara Krishnappa. Narayanappa versus Bhaskara Krishnappa, where it was held at the time of dissolution. Let us say there are properties, firm is dissolved, one partner takes the immovable property, other partner takes the money. Does it require registration? As per 1966 Supreme Court, no registration was contemplated, but this problem has been plugged now because Stamp Act has been amended, at least Tamil Nadu is concerned, where they have said whenever there is a dissolution of a firm and the property is taken by somebody, it requires stamp duty, but at a different level. But for the amendment to the Stamp Act, it is per se, according to section 14, it does not become registerable, nor does it require a stamp duty being paid. This is the 1966 Supreme Court. Why I'm making this statement is, all that you need to understand, a partner is entitled to a share in the profits and the property of the firm. Therefore, whenever a partner retires and goes out, there is what is called as a general revaluation of the assets of the firm. How do you find out what is the money payable to the other person? The method is you try to find the revaluation of assets and its liabilities, pass the resultant profit or loss to the capital account, and then you pay him. If there is no share in the property of the firm, this process will not take place. This is the fundamental aspect that one has to remember under section 14. From 14, I want you to remember section 27 of the Contract Act prohibits an agreement in restraint of marriage, in restraint of trade. But section 27 is exempted under the Partnership Act under section 11 and under section 54. Section 27 is exempted. Section 27 will not have an operation. When there is one partner goes out, he takes money because of the goodwill that he gives, and in the partnership he agrees that he will not carry on the competing business within a particular area, then that agreement is valid, notwithstanding the fact that section 27 of the Contract Act renders it void. That is why I said section 1 to 75 of the Contract Act are applicable, so long as they are not inconsistent with the special law, namely the Partnership Act. This is one exception that comes into play. Then when a partnership firm, when a person wants to retire from the business, all that he has to do is to give a notice. If the manner in which it is contemplated under the partnership deed. Once he gives a notice, he can retire. If all partners give a consent, he can retire. and there is something known as partnership at will. The partnership at will is concerned, it means the moment one partner says, I am getting out, it immediately comes into operation. And in all these things, when we draft a partnership deed, we will have to keep it in mind. Merely because one man gets out, it should not come to a grinding halt. Therefore, the partnership deed should usually contain a clause: the death, insolvency, or retirement of a partner shall not result in the dissolution of the partnership and therefore consequently of the firm. Otherwise, what happens is, when there is a dissolution, the entire assets of the partnership cannot be put to use at all. There will be an embargo. Therefore, the partnership deed must very specifically state that it shall not result in the dissolution of the firm. This is provided. And if nothing is parted, and one more thing that you've got to remember is, even by a majority, partners cannot expel another partner. Expulsion of a partner is unknown. Section 33 of the Partnership Act provides for that. One partner cannot be expelled. In order to expel this, there must be a clause in the partnership deed which says the partners by a majority can expel other or other partners. But that is not sufficient. Even if it is provided under the partnership deed, without mentioning in the deed, it can never be done. If it is mentioned in the deed, the partners must exercise such power in good faith. The word used is good faith, so you will have to go to the General Clauses Act. Without that, you cannot expel. Those who have seen some matters in the company's code, you will find a private limited company is nothing but a glorified partnership firm. Therefore, if 4 partners convert it into a private limited company, one director cannot be removed based on this principle only, where he has got a right. He could not have been expelled had the partnership continued. Therefore, you cannot expel him. This is the principle with regard to section 33. Then what you have got to remember is, within the time, if there is a problem, what is the right of a partner then? The right of a partner is to seek dissolution of the firm. So what is the suit that we fight? Whenever there is a fight, the partners are not able to carry on business. It is not at will. It is at will, but the partners are not coming for a solution. Then obviously, the partners can file a suit in a court saying that, please declare that the firm is dissolved. And the firm is dissolved the moment notice is given that it is dissolved. And if no notice is given, on the date when the plaint is presented, it stands dissolved. If it is already dissolved by the partners, your suit will be one for rendition of accounts. Each partner should give an account to the other person. That is a requirement. If A is maintaining a property, the accounts, then A has to render the accounts. What do you mean by rendering accounts? He has to give you the entire accounts of all the preceding years, where he has to give the expenses incurred by him along with the documents, and another partner can challenge it if he had not already acquiesced or accepted those entries. Therefore, this is the second relief that he can get. But during the continuance of the partnership, if it is for a fixed period, you cannot ask for a dissolution of term unless otherwise the period expires. And in that case, you can ask for only certain interim reliefs, which would normally offer an interim relief, like what? A partner shall not carry on competing business during the currency of the partnership. Somebody carries on business, you can file a suit for an injunction restraining from carrying on the competing business, or ask him to account for the secret profits made there. This is the third suit that is possible. In a partnership, the thumb rule is, if there is an acrimonious dispute between the partners and the partnership firm is a going concern and there is a very good business, the normal principle is normally a receiver is appointed. The courts normally prefer to appoint the partner who was running the business as a receiver, and he becomes a court receiver, he has to render accounts. Receiver normally follows in any partnership suit. Under service, there are other circumstances not mentioned in Order 41 of the Code of Civil Procedure. Normally, the problem arises between two partners is when one partner knocks away the property of the firm, he uses it for his own use. Normally, we will say, you are a partner, you had this property, you have taken the property for your own use, therefore, there is a breach of trust. We normally file a suit, a criminal complaint, saying that there is a criminal breach of trust within the meaning of section 405 and aggravated form 406 and 409, because an agent comes under the provision of 409. But please understand, the Supreme Court in the 1968 judgment, I don't have handy, where they have said, in a partnership, there is no entrustment or dominion over a property by one partner to another partner. Consequently, the criminal breach of trust cannot be sustained. The exception that is carved out for that proposition is where the partnership deed says, so-and-so is the managing partner, he shall be in custody of all the properties of the firm, then which case there is an entrustment or dominion over the property, which even section 405 to 409 will apply, otherwise it will not apply. No. Considering the fact that I'm running out of time, it is already 10:40. If you think we can have some question session, I'm willing to answer it for next 20 minutes. I've given you a very, very broad outline because it is impossible, but I must tell you that in the case of a partnership firm, the liability of a partner is unlimited. The liability of a partner is unlimited, joint and several. And where do you find this word joint and several? What do you mean by the word joint and several liability? It means a person to whom the firm owes money can proceed against one partner and collect the entire money due by all partners. He can collect the money, he need not wait. The word joint means all are responsible. The word several means all are responsible, but each one is responsible only to the share he has. Joint and several means all are responsible and each one is responsible to the extent he is liable. Let us say if he is a 25% partner, his liability is 25%. In a partnership, the liability is joint and several. Therefore, he will be called upon to pay the 100%, but he can go to the other partners, recover the 75% from him. In order to go into this process, you have to go to section 43 of the Contract Act, where joint promises made. There are joint promises, their liability is joint, and there is a provision in 43(2) or so, where you are entitled to proceed against the other partner for recovery of money. This is the concept of joint, joint and several, and joint and several. The liability is unlimited. In order to solve this problem and encourage multidisciplinary persons becoming a partner, the Limited Liability Partnership Act was passed. The Limited Liability Partnership introduces certain rigmaroles, which is known to the corporate entities, and these rigmaroles are not applicable normally to a partnership firm, where there is no compulsory audit that is required, unless otherwise you are going to go under the Income Tax Act. But in a company, you require a compulsory audit, and in a LLP also you require an audit. Forms to be filed. Registrar of the Limited Liability Partnership, who is the registrar of companies, he should be kept informed, etc. The Limited Liability Partnership will apply in all these cases. And only one thing which I want to tell you, there is a ceiling on the number of partners under the partnership law. But funny thing you will find, there is no provision in the Partnership Act. If you want to continue this, if you want to, the ceiling is provided under the old section 11 of the Companies Act 1956. I do not have the book. There is a similar provision in the 2013 Act. It is 10 in the case of non-banking, 20 in the case of banking concern. Partnership. There is a ceiling provided. Therefore, if somebody comes and says, which is common in your movie partnership firms or real estate firms, there will be 22 partners who will join as a partner. But you must understand that partnership constitutes an illegal association, will be prohibited by the Companies Act and excluded by the Partnership Act. Sir Harun, do I think
yes, sir. Yes,
I'm sorry, I could make only this much in 40 minutes.
No problem. We are, in fact, honored by it. We know your constraints as well.
Ceiling is 100. Companies Act 2013, the partnership
section.
464 of Companies Act 2013.
No, I'm sorry. 464 of the Companies Act 2013 has increased the ceiling on number of partners to 100. Therefore, no, there is no issue at all. The section 11 of the Companies Act 1956 is represented in section 464 of the Companies Act 2013.
Sir, there are few questions in the chat box. Please. And few friends also raised their hands to pose some questions, but from want of time, I'm not unmuting the system. I'll just read out one or two questions. Sorry. Whether a friend has asked whether tenant right of any properties can be added in a proper partnership firm.
I'm sorry, whether?
Tenancy right of any property,
Uh,
can it be added in the partnership firm?
Tenancy right, yes, because it will become the leasehold right will be transferred to the partnership firm in that case. If there is already a tenancy in existence, the Partnership Act will recognize that the partners will become the tenant and you have to get an atonement from the landlord. That is required, of course. Under the rent control law, you require an atonement.
Yes. Sir, another friend, once Aravind, he has posed a question as to the difference between a partnership and a firm.
That is why I said the partners are the individual partners collectively. The collective name of the partnership is the firm. Supposing A, B, C, D are there, it is a firm called as A and Company. This A and Company is the collective representation of A, B, C, and D. A is a partner, B is a partner, C is a partner, D is a partner. Not much of a difference. But when we file a suit with regard to partnership, you must have regard to section order 30 of the Civil Procedure Code.
Sir, this last and final question. Sir, for instituting a complaint under section 138 of the Negotiable Instrument Act, is it necessary that all the partners will have to jointly file a complaint?
No, not necessary. It's enough. All that we require is under section 12 of the Partnership Act. The partners can pass a resolution, just as in a company. All that is required is a resolution. But I am conscious of this fact that the magistrates court do demand a power of attorney. But I can tell you something very interesting. Even with the power of attorney, you file it. I want you to please make a note of this case, AAR 1997 Supreme Court, page 3, where the matter went right up to the Supreme Court. He did not have any authority in a civil suit. They held it is maintainable. It cannot be questioned on that ground. AAR 1997 Supreme Court, page 3. To my knowledge, it has not been overruled. And I did a matter, but it is called as Modern Denim Industries versus Blue Cost TVS. It was reported sometime in 1997 or 1998. CTC it is reported. Modern Denim Limited versus Blue Cost TVS, where when I filed the complaint on behalf of the company, I did not give a resolution, nor did I have a power of attorney. A quashing was sought. I said it is always curable, whatever you want. Therefore, quashing was dismissed. Ultimately, the matter was settled. It did not go to the trial. But I'm telling you, the magistrates do insist on a power of attorney. I don't think it is correct. Because the very principle of partnership is agency.
Yes.
Only since we have no other questions, I'll just take two more things. You will have to remember the powers of a partner is referred to in section 19, 20, 21, and 22. Section 19 says, subject to the provisions of 22, the partner has an implied authority to do everything, but 19.2 is very important. Things which they cannot do unless otherwise there is a consent from all partners is very important. One is, he cannot invoke the arbitration clause. He cannot enter into a compromise unless otherwise it is authorized by the other partners. I had a very interesting case where two persons joined into a partnership for a very limited purpose for underlaying the drainage pipes in Coimbatore given by the Corporation of Coimbatore. And in that firm, one of the partners who was actually the working partner, he did, and he landed himself in a trouble. He referred the matter to and invoked the arbitration clause. The question arose, I took a stand saying that the arbitration is not maintainable because he did not get my consent to invoke the arbitration clause. Since he invoked the arbitration clause, there was a counterclaim, and therefore I will suffer a decree. I said, when you did not have a authority to invoke the arbitration clause, the very constitution of the arbitral tribunal is contrary because 19.2 is a bar. Even though the principle of agency applies, in respect of those matters provided under section 92, you cannot do it at all. Therefore, 1922 is also you should keep in mind. All sections are important in any law. I am trying to give you an overall picture.
Thank you.
I would like to spend some time with you all sometime. Probably we can go much in depth because section 6 itself involves so many case laws as to what is the test of a partnership. And this section 69, 44, 48 is the centration of accounts. All these things are matter of great interest. But only one more thing which I would like to add. Even if you file a suit only against a partner and you get a decree, not in making the partners individually parties to the suit. If my memory is right, section 51 of the Code of Civil Procedure, you can bring the partners or also make them liable. If my 51, where was I? Section 51. I'm just trying to look into it. 51 of the Code of Civil Procedure. I think it covers such a situation. I remember. Only 1 second. Please bear with me for a minute. Subject to decree. Section number 50. There is some provision of the Partnership Act. I distinctly remember 50 or 51. Somewhere there I have found out. But you are entitled to file you can implement them at any point of time. It is liable because ultimately the partners who have to pay the money. The firm as such has no legal existence. Its legal existence is recognized by law in the matters of Income Tax Act under 184 onwards. It is there. And as a matter of fact, coming to this point, though not related to partnership, even a society has been held to be not a juristic person. Society, it is Ilayachi, ILLAYACHI, Ilayachi versus some Jain Society, 2003, 8 SEC, page 413. In fact, I hold a view that whenever a society files a suit, when a company files a suit, you will name the plaintiff A and B Private Limited, represented by Managing Director. But if it is not a juristic person, this is what the Supreme Court says, 2003, 8 SEC, page 413, according to me, it should be the president dash society, not society represented by the president. I do not know, I have not tested it, but this is how this particular judgment looks like. In Ilayachi's case, a will was executed and the society sought a probate of it. The Supreme Court said, society is not a juristic person, you cannot do it. Ask somebody, officer of the society, to come forward and ask for a probate and not the society by itself. This is what matter went to the, I think from Bombay, it went to the Supreme Court. We have got 10 more minutes.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. In fact, it was a very illustrative and enlightening session. In fact, participants, though you have posted various questions to the chat box and you want to ask few questions to the senior, but for want of concern, a senior has got a virtual court hearing today before the High Court at 11 o'clock. We are constrained to end this session, and your questions will be forwarded to the senior by way of mail. And
I will definitely answer it. It's a pleasure to be with you all. It's a great pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
For Thanksgiving. Sir, you have in fact traced the history of partnership with the illustration, and you have also referred to the various provisions, especially non-registration, effect of non-registration of a partnership firm, which would of course benefit all the participants, more than 270 participants today who have been benefited out of this session. We thank you, sir, for your time, valuable time, as well as your research work in giving us the input. Thank you, sir. We would like to host you once again. Thank you once again.
I'm happy, but only one correction is Order 21, Rule 50.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And to the participants, we thank you all for the overwhelming response we have for this series we conducted this week with the senior case. And we hope that you all would have been benefited out of this knowledge sharing session. In fact, we don't have any session tomorrow. Our next session would start from Monday, and we are going to present host the sitting judges and the retired judges of our Honorable High Court and other Honorable High Court on the topic of enhancing the professional competency. And we would soon send you the webinar schedule in the course of the day. Thank you, participants. We also expect you for the coming session in the college. Thank you, sir, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you all.